Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Welcome everyone to another week of the Damage Report. I am John Idarola. Very excited to start off this week of news, as we always do on Mondays, with Brooke.
Hi, yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I'm very excited for you to be here, especially because you haven't seen it yet, but if you're a member of TYT, a little bit later on this month, a special event that we've filmed here at the network is gonna come out. It's called Hostmates, and it pairs up teams of hosts, and we compete in a game show against each other. And we had a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun, we had a lot of fun. We didn't have a lot of right answers. We had a lot of fun though.
No spoilers.
Okay.
We are already excited for next year. And don't tell this to any of the other hosts, but we're gonna be best friends by then. We're
Absolutely.
gonna know everything about each other.
I thought we were best friends. See, the math didn't add up.
What? We don't know anything about the math. But we have bonded this morning over Chrissy Teigen. And we both like her cookbooks.
We both like her cookbooks.
Basically there.
We like her food. We are basically there.
We're basically there.
We're not as big of fans of Chrissy as Brett.
But yeah, he's in the fan club.
He created it.
Yeah.
But we are huge fans.
Okay,
so
well maybe someday we'll get there. Yeah, we've got a big day of news. We're gonna be talking about the death of Jamal Khashoggi. We now have a much better idea of what was going on in the last minutes of his life, coming from a source familiar with the matter. Big climate conference happening in Europe right now. America making its mark at that conference. We will describe exactly how. And then a little bit later on, we've got two things. One really important, that is how schools across America are helping to participate in America's war on the poor. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if we have time for it, one of the pettiest stories we've ever talked about in Damage Report history, but I'm very excited for it. So maybe we'll get to that in the last block. We'll have to see.
Okay.
Okay. But ahead of that, lots of important news to get to. And also, there is some developing news going on in DC right now. We're gonna return to that a little bit later on the show, let you know what's happening when we talk a little bit more about the climate later on in this episode. Oh, I forgot.
What?
On another climate related topic, I actually have a correction that I have to make.
Okay. Oh, right.
Doesn't happen often because we try to do our research. But we were talking about the historic levels of ice melt on Greenland. And in that story, I cited a statistic from memory that if all of the ice in Greenland melted, it would raise sea levels globally by, I think I said 3 meters. And a lot of people responded and said, that's crazy. And you're right, it was crazy. It's not 3 meters, it's actually 20 feet. So it's crazier than I had thought it was. So just to be clear, even worse than we thought.
But you were softer on it then.
Exactly,
Right, okay.
exactly. The threat, as is so often the case with climate change, worse than our worst fears. With that, why don't we jump to other news? We know that Jamal Khashoggi died in the very beginning of October, and we are fairly certain of how exactly it happened. We know who conducted it, we know who ordered it. The White House might not be willing to accept that, but we know the deal. But what specifically was going on in the moments leading up to his death? We've gotten some hints of what is in that transcript that the Turkish government apparently has gotten access to. And now we have, from a source familiar with it, being backed up by a Democratic senator who was briefed on the matter by Gina Haspel, an idea of specifically what was said. This is obviously very dark stuff, but we're gonna read you some excerpts from that transcript. In the first section, he is told, "You are coming back." This is by an individual identified as Maher Abdulaziz Mutreb, former Saudi diplomat and intelligence official for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi replies, "You can't do that. People are waiting outside." I understand that while he's saying that, of course, his sort of wife-to-be is waiting outside of the embassy. After that, it is identified that several people are heard striking Khashoggi. So in response to him saying that you can't make me leave, he is set upon almost instantaneously. Then the last discernible words the transcript records for Khashoggi are identified as, "I can't breathe," which he apparently mentioned several times. The transcript then notes more noises and several more voices, although no words. And then this is where it gets into the darkest section. The transcript then begins to note the noises that can be heard on the tape, almost in the manner that subtitles describe moments in movies where there's no dialogue. It just says scream, scream, gasping, then saw, cutting. So apparently on the audio that they were able to get access to, you can actually hear the torture and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi. Again, Washington Post a journalist and resident of the United States.
Yeah. It's awful.
It is awful, and it's not too different than what we knew happened, but seeing it laid out in that way is a reminder of how horrendous this story actually was.
And the fact that we're willing to read this and to get a better understanding of what happened, knowing what we already know, and people in power are refusing to take much of a part in this. People who have the ability to listen to the actual audio and just have no desire to. I think that puts things in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we are perhaps biased in that we are not looking for TYT to sell weapons to any of the relevant parties, and me and you aren't gonna make we don't make business deals with the leadership of Saudi Arabia, so maybe it's harder to put ourselves in their perspective, or from their point of view, I should say.
Yeah, murder is wrong is where I'm gonna just stand.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so additionally, Dr. Salah Muhammad Al-Tubaki is noted giving some advice to other people in the room, apparently to help them deal with the appalling task. Put your earphones in or listen to music like me, he says. So that is something that we did know early on, but a reminder, he is the head of forensic medicine at Saudi Arabia's Interior Ministry. So again, chief diplomat, intelligence officer to bin Salman and the head of forensic medicine. And that's what they're saying.
Wait,
and by the way, this is amazing that they've got this in the transcript, but according to the source, which again has been confirmed by a Democratic senator, the transcript suggests that Mutreb, the diplomat that we talked about earlier, is updating someone on the phone whom Turkish officials say was in Riyadh with almost step-by-step details of what's taking place. He says, tell yours, the thing is done, it's done. And CNN's source says that that was a reference to a superior or to a boss. And so multiple phone calls were being made in the moments leading up to and after the death of this journalist. So it's being communicated in very granular detail to whoever it was. We don't know who ordered this hit.
It just kind of implies that someone in power knew that this was going to happen.
Yeah, yeah, and so we now have access to these details. Of course, the people who could theoretically do something about this, they've had this information for some time, both on the Turkish side and of course on the US side as well. They saw all of that and more that you just witnessed, and in response to that have done absolutely nothing.
Right.
So just bear that in mind for the future of the relationship between US and Saudi Arabia. There is apparently nothing you can do, nothing you can order that will cause us to break off our military and economic ties to you. One other detail of the story, very interesting. We've noted for some time that Jared Kushner, who is in charge of apparently everything foreign policy related at the White House, has a weird relationship with the leadership of certain regimes in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. We're finding out more now about that relationship, what caused it and what effect Saudi Arabia is getting out of that relationship. So very interesting and related to our talk about Jamal Khashoggi and his death. The New York Times says that Kushner, quote, has offered the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman advice about how to weather the storm in the wake of the killing and to, quote, resolve his conflicts around the Mideast region and avoid further embarrassments. So at the same time, that Jared Kushner, he's been asked once or twice about this and says, he was saying, well, we're in a fact-finding sort of mode right now. We don't know exactly what happened. We don't want to rush to conclusions. Behind the scenes, he's on the phone with this guy on a first-name basis, telling him how it is that he can avoid bad PR and make sure that this doesn't reflect poorly on the regime that ordered this international assassination.
Instead of being horrified that this happened, and he's like, helping him deal.
Yeah.
Like it's okay.
Yeah, he's helping him deal, and they are apparently buddies. So, meanwhile, the newspaper says Kushner became Salman's most important defender inside of the White House, helping to persuade the president to avoid criticizing the Saudis for any direct role in the murder. I don't know how much help was needed to get him to not do that, but he apparently has been lobbying, according to sources in the White House, to relevant people there to not do anything, not criticize them, and eventually just let it fade away. And for the most part, that appears to have worked. Most media outlets aren't talking about this story anymore. It is potentially the case that New York Times reporting will lead to a little bit of it, but most people have moved on since the election.
Right.
Now, one other interesting thing, the history of this relationship. So why did we get to this point where Jared Kushner and Mohammed bin Salman are texting each other on a first-name basis? Well, the Times reports that Saudi Arabia early on saw Kushner as a viable, impressionable target and began what the reporters describe as, quote, the courtship of Mr. Kushner. Prince Mohammed and his advisors, eager to enlist Americans' support for his hawkish policies in the region and for his own consolidation of power, cultivated the relationship with Mr. Kushner for more than 2 years, according to documents, emails, and text messages the New York Times got access to. So this is something that they invested in, and it looks like it's paying dividends for them.
Right. Earlier when you called them buddies, I know that you were not being like super serious.
Being somewhat flippant.
Right. But like, yeah, absolutely, they're not buddies. There's just no way. Just this logically, this situation just makes any sense. These are two people who feel like they can get something great out of the other person, and usually in situations like that, one person is just being used.
Yeah, and this is, like, we knew when Jared Kushner was being brought into the White House and he was just being handed project after project that he was unqualified, ill-equipped to actually deal with these situations, and also, like with almost everyone else in the White House, incredibly conflicted.
Right.
So here's the thing, you get this guy that is incredibly young, he has been handed an empire to manage, much like Donald Trump was, and this young guy, he's like my age or whatever, he then goes off and all of a sudden he's getting called by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And whether just because he's naive and inexperienced, or for more personally, like, concern for profit reasons, he is going to be influenced by that. In the same way that Donald Trump cannot be trusted to deal in an unbiased fashion with Saudi Arabia, not only because of the economic and military ties between our two countries, but also because of his own personal economic interest in having the Saudis rent out his hotels, that was reported on last week, buy his apartments, build buildings in Saudi Arabia. Jared Kushner has those exact same issues. He is a real estate developer in the same way. He would love to have access to huge quantities of fairly unregulated money coming from Saudi Arabia. And now we're supposed to trust him because, in the words of a member of the council,
we need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Foreign relations, he's developed a bromance with Mohammed bin Salman. And as a result of that, on issues like these assassinations, we get nothing even approaching justice. That is the issue with these conflicts of interest, when they get in the White House. Anyway, with that said, we do have to take our first break. When we come back, lots more news to get to. Welcome back to the Damage Report, everybody. We're gonna turn now to a topic that doesn't come up very often on this channel. It's the climate.
Oh,
and once again,
a
little bit. So we've got a tale of two climates and a tale of two approaches to it. One I would say is responsible, the other I would say is suicidal. And so let's describe both. First, the responsible. As we speak, there is a protest going on in DC. It was primarily outside of the office of Representative Pelosi, but others as well. And once again, as it was several weeks ago, it's being led by the Sunrise Movement. This is a relatively, up until recently, not well-known activist group that is now shot to incredible prominence, made up of young climate activists. And when I say young, I mean there are 11 and 12-year-olds participating in this protest in the halls of Congress, literally as we speak. Now, they have gone to put pressure on various leaders inside the Democratic Party to push for a Green New Deal. And to do that, they have brought all these signs. They have this huge 40-foot banner. You're seeing there, this is from the previous protests a couple of weeks ago. And they are also willing to be arrested, and they are in fact being arrested. So apparently it's many dozens of protesters that were outside of Nancy Pelosi's office. They have already been zip tied and carted off. That is what I have read. The others outside of the other offices are facing that as well, and likely it might happen at some point in the near future. But it is still impressive to see this is being organized by very young people. It is being, people are showing up to volunteer that are even younger than them, but they recognize in a way that many of our more conflicted politicians do that we don't have time to waste. We can't wait until we're 18 to maybe start to care about the climate.
And but it's not super surprising when you think about just like logic, because the 11, 12-year-olds, this is their planet and their future. And when we're talking about having 12 years to get things on track to where it's not, like a permanent issue, 12 years. Unfortunately, a lot of our politicians aren't thinking about 2030 because they're 90.
Exactly. They ain't gonna see 2030 or not even close to it. Yeah, that is unfortunate, and you can see it in the debates in the Senate. I mean, these are people. Some of them distinguished. They've long history of public service, whatever. They're relics. They don't understand the threat. Like, just imagine how hard it would be to take it as seriously if you will not directly be affected by it. You might be a great person and be possessed of so much empathy that you can do it anyway, but it's naturally gonna be harder. We're a very short-sighted people, naturally, humans are. We don't think about threats that aren't immediately in our face.
Far too many politicians only care about things that affect them. And the history of the politics in this country in all, like many different areas really reflect that.
Yeah.
This is just the latest.
Yeah. So thankfully that's going on right now. I don't know if Nancy Pelosi ever made an appearance. I suspect that she did not. But on tomorrow's show, we're gonna have Emma Vigeland of Rebel HQ. She was reporting live from the protest today. She's gonna be joining us tomorrow to break down what happened, talk about a few other things as well. And hopefully we've already previously had representation from the Sunrise Movement. One of the founders was on the show. We're trying to get her back a little bit later on this week as well. So very important that they're continuing to put pressure on the leadership. They might do the right thing, but if they do, it is definitely going to be a result of a protest like this. Now, on the other side, there's a major international climate conference going on right now in Europe. It's the COP24, and one of the things that they're debating there is the findings of a report that was commissioned by another UN climate conference back in 2015. So the UN asked for this. Thousands of scientists worked on it for a number of years and then produced it. And it turned out, this is probably not gonna shock you, that the information that they came up with was not positive. The report said that the world is now completely off track, heading more towards 3 degrees Celsius rise in temperature this century rather than 1.5. To put it in perspective, the Paris Climate Accords are saying that we should try to do whatever is necessary to limit it to 2 degrees, which is already going to be a disaster, but anything worse than that is hard to even imagine. They're saying we're on track for that. Now, to accomplish the goal of not getting to 3 degrees or even more, they say that we would need rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And if we want to be kept to 1.5 degrees Celsius this century, emissions of carbon dioxide would have to be reduced by 45% by 2030. And unfortunately, in even the most extreme cases that we've seen, where individual states have decided to limit their emissions or countries are talking about it, that's about the limit that they've gotten to, and it's not widespread. It's still very rare. The problem is that report, which should have been met by, hey, we asked you to do this.
Right, we all commissioned this, right?
And it's very important, obviously, biggest threat facing our species. Let's do something about it. Almost every country in the world with representation in the UN was like, yes, we've got this information, now let's use it. But there were 4 countries that did not greet this report with as much respect or I guess, I don't know, the impetus for change that you would expect. There were 4. It was Russia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the US. When it was submitted to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change on Saturday, those 4 countries rejected a motion to, quote, welcome the study. Instead, they said it should merely be noted, which would make it much easier for governments to ignore. And with no consensus under UN rules, the passage of text had to be dropped. And as a result, actual progress at this gigantic conference on climate is being derailed because of these insanely petty and suicidal concerns of these 4 countries.
Like it's so embarrassing to be a part of this. Like I thought this country, was smarter than this.
Well, you would hope, considering the stakes.
I'm never surprised by the racism here, but the like just outwardly like just denying science. We are absolutely supposed to be a better country than that.
Yeah.
This is weird.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
And I want to read you a quote from Ruania Haynes, a delegate for St. Kitts, who said, "It's very frustrating that we are not able to take into account the report's findings. We're talking about the future of the world. It sounds like hyperbole when I say it, but that's how serious it is." And no, you are wrong. It does not sound like hyperbole. We are years past thinking that that sort of statement is hyperbolic. It is realistic. It is, in fact, I would say, we're too late even with where we've come to with our respect for climate change and the threat that it poses. You have this major convention going on that for the most part, 99% of America won't even know is happening. It's not gonna be talked about. Yes, it's in Europe, still sort of significant considering that the climate that affects Europe also affects us too. And I think that one of the reasons we were able to object to the inclusion or the welcoming of these findings in the way that we did is because of the expectation that people wouldn't care. Primarily because they would never find out about it. But even if they did, they would be told that it's not a big concern, or if it's a concern in 30 or 50 years. And that's unfortunate.
Right. So yeah.
Okay, we do have to take another break. When we come back, last week was big on revelations from the Mueller investigation. What is the reaction from the White House? How are they greeting this new information after this? Welcome back to the Damage Report, everybody. It's the Monday edition, which means it's the Brooke edition.
Yes, I like that.
Very exciting.
tyt.com/Brooke.
There you go, and I'm not even gonna say mine. I'm just gonna leave it at that. /Brooke. With that, let's jump to a little bit of news that I'd been waiting for. So last week we had the sentencing memos for Michael Cohen, and we also had updated information about what exactly Paul Manafort did that violated his cooperating agreement with the special counsel's office. And on the second part with Manafort, we find out that he had apparently lied a number of different times about his communications, both with the White House and with someone connected to Russian intelligence. So he had been having those communications. We don't know exactly what about, but there's reason to believe, based on the redacting, that it might have been individual one who is, we don't know for sure who it is, but it sure seems like Donald Trump. That's pretty assured at this point.
In the Cohen papers, it's very clear it's Donald Trump.
Yeah, they talk about him going on to win the election. So, but we still don't know for sure.
Right.
Like, whoever he is, he's screwed. But when it comes to Cohen, we also have really a tale of two sentencing memos, because we had the federal prosecutors in New York on the one hand, and then we had Robert Mueller's personal sentencing memo on the other. Now, the federal prosecutors in New York, they talk about the campaign finance violations that he and Donald Trump participated in paying off Donald Trump's mistresses in the run-up to the election. But they also say that on other crimes, he was not particularly helpful, that he didn't really provide any information that they didn't already have access to.
That's a fascinating part of that there is some hard line that he drew.
With them.
Right, and they also noted, right, you're about to say it, right?
Yeah, but it is interesting. I agree that with Mueller, he says he was pretty helpful.
They noted that in like, he's incredibly helpful with this special prosecutor, but I'm fascinated. I would like to know what they wanted from him as far as help that he refused to do.
I would assume, considering that it is, the Southern District of New York, I would assume that it's crimes relevant to New York. It's possible it's other campaign finance violations. It could be money laundering, something like that. Their focus is probably fairly closely connected with New York.
I mean, there were enough crimes noted in what we got. It was a lot.
And we do have to note that they say that felonies were committed in coordination with Donald Trump.
Right.
So later on, we're gonna talk about the whole unindicted co-conspirator thing. I mean, we don't have that as an actual term that is used in this, but they are saying that individual one directed someone to commit felonies. So that is out there. And by the way, they're not gonna put that in the sentencing memos unless they have good evidence of that. Because theoretically, that could then be used by the defense lawyers if the sentencing doesn't go the way that Michael Cohen would want it to. And considering the guidelines that the federal prosecutors laid out, it probably isn't going to, because they want him to go to jail for 4 or 5 years. Mueller seems more okay with the sentence being reduced a little bit, but the federal prosecutors are like, he wasn't that helpful, throw the book at him.
The book of 4 long years.
The book of 4
listen,
long years, yeah.
I've never been to jail or prison. 2 days in jail sounds substantive to me, sounds significant to me. But 4 years, I was, it's a lot of crimes that he committed purely on the basis of just greed.
Yeah, it's tough because, he did commit a bunch of crimes, but I don't want to go to jail at all.
I don't want to go to jail at all, yeah.
For any time.
That's why I don't commit federal crimes.
Yeah, if it makes you feel better, he'll probably go to a pretty nice jail.
Yeah, absolutely.
If he goes at all, which he probably will, and it'll probably be nice. Now, I've been wondering since then, how will Donald Trump actually react? Because we got in advance of these memos coming out, he went sort of crazy. Let's see, once you have a weekend of some reporting about it, what does he do? So this morning we have this tweet. Democrats can't find a smocking gun tying the Trump campaign to Russia after James Comey's testimony. No smocking gun, no collusion. He's quoting Fox News, although I'm pretty sure that they didn't say that. I don't think they said smocking gun capitalized. That's because there was no collusion. So now the Dems go to a simple private transaction. There, he's talking about paying off the mistress, wrongly calling it a campaign contribution, which it was not. But even if it was only a civil case like Obama's, but it was done correctly by a lawyer and there would not even be a fine. Lawyer's liability if he made a mistake, not me. Cohen just trying to get a sentence reduced, witch hunt.
What? There's so much, it's
complex.
It's exhausting. There's so much, what I wanna focus on for me personally is like Obama's. There is, I'm sorry, former President Obama had nothing to do with this. Nothing like this, what are you talking about?
So they have this whataboutism that he had, it's something like they had accepted too much money from one group without reporting it, so they gave the money back. But that's supposed to be the same thing. It's not the same thing, but that's what they say. And so first of all, on the smocking gun, I'm just gonna say this. I know that not everybody agrees with me. I think he did it on purpose. I think he typed out SMOCKING to distract people. Maybe I could be wrong. I'm more interested in the second part because as I noted on Twitter, he says they're calling it a campaign contribution, which it was not, even though it is effectively a campaign contribution. It's not up to you. It's done in the lead up to the election to deceive the people. They have evidence that that was not only the effect, but the intent. So you're wrong there. But even if it was only a civil case, that's not true. It is a criminal offense. Like Obama's, which it's not. It would only be the lawyer's liability if you made a mistake, not me. That's not true. They can show that you directed it. And Cohen just trying to get a sentence reduced. That might be true hypothetically, but it is also apparently true. It has been verified outside of Cohen. So in one tweet, the second half of a tweet, he gave 5 reasons. I guess witch hunt makes it 6. If you have to list 6 reasons, I don't think that you're innocent. It's like, hey baby, where were you? Oh, well, I had to stay late for work and also I got kind of sick and my mom called me, so I had to, like, if you're giving all of those reasons, that's not generally how an innocent person responds to those sorts of things. Right. So I don't think he can say that the Comey testimony, which the Republicans called for, absolves him of responsibility or shows that nothing was going on, but he's not acting like a guy who actually believes that, to me.
Speaking of like distractions, every time he says something like this, what happens is a lot of publications will have a huge headline that says no collusion or no collusion says Donald Trump or something of the sorts, and then they'll break it down and explain how he's not telling the truth in the article. But it doesn't matter in this day when people get their news from just tweets.
Yeah, it's in the article, as you say. It might as well be scrawled on the wall of a bathroom in Idaho. Like some people will read it, sure, responsible people. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that those people didn't believe the president to begin with. But yeah, the New York Times did that.
Well, and I think that's part of his like doing things on purpose for a distraction. That works every single time, and so it's hard to say that he's not doing that on purpose.
Yeah, that is one of the most frustrating things imaginable. I mean, the amount of obvious, verifiable lies that he has told for an organization like the New York Times to just put in a headline that the president said something, not even imply that it might not be true or that it's even debated, is completely irresponsible. The New York Times was rightfully mocked about that. Hopefully they won't do it in the future. But I wanna move on to one related thing. What does the White House and Republicans, what do they actually think about this news that came out last week? Well, it's really a tale of two things. It is, at the same time, sort of blissful ignorance combined with a siege mentality, which seems weird, but let's break it down. So according to the Washington Post, the White House is adopting what one official termed a quote, shrugged shoulders strategy for the Mueller findings. calculating that most GOP-based voters will believe whatever the president tells them to believe. That is sort of sad, but also incredibly savvy, because they're right. There's 30% of this country that will never, ever believe anything happened. It doesn't matter what comes out. It doesn't matter what comes out in texts or emails or phone calls or we have the video. It doesn't matter. And so to some extent, they're right. Do you think that this is a wise strategy? That they can rely on the fact that their base will never question them?
Yes, it's how everything's been working for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are so many people that, I mean, with all of the developments that have come out over the past few years, if your view has not changed at all, that is bizarre. But 30% of the country actually feels that way. And he knows that they'll vote for him again anyway. What's interesting is that a lot of people are not happy with that in the Republican Party. They say rather than building a war room to manage the intersecting crises as past administrations have done, the Trump White House is understaffed, stuck in a bunker mentality, and largely resigned to a plan to wing it. Political and communications operatives are mostly taking their cues from the president and letting him drive the message with his spontaneous broadsides. Which I get why Trump would think that's a good strategy, because when he goes to his rallies, they do believe him and they still support him. And as we said, they will always support him. But they're not the only people seeing those tweets. Robert Mueller and the investigators are seeing them. Regular thinking, rational people are seeing them. And at some point, you might need to convince those people too. And so the strategy seems to have a gigantic blind spot in it, I think.
When it comes to other like Republican lawmakers, Republican politicians, and this threat that, okay, we'll step away from him if this comes out to be true, or he's doing this. It can be like bottled up in Jeff Flake's tweets. Like this idea that, because this has happened before, there've been other instances where people have chosen to step away but then still vote with him and then still support everything that he does.
Exactly.
So sure, you will send out a statement that says you don't believe in that, you're against that, but that is all you will do.
Yeah, that's the limit. And they'll talk to the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And say that they're concerned, but they're not actually doing anything about it. And apparently that thing about it being understaffed in the White House, I mean, we've talked previously about the State Department being that way. Apparently that is a big problem in the White House. Lots of people being given positions or offered positions aren't taking them, partially because I think they're worried about that being on their resume going forward, considering what might happen with Donald Trump. But then also they're worried that they would immediately have to hire lawyers.
Right, that's a huge thing, that you're worried about like everything being so corrupt in the White House that you're afraid to take a job for fear that you may be implicated somehow.
Exactly, or at the very least, even if you're not, that you might have to pay these legal fees.
Right.
Nobody wants to pay that. And that is why he's having apparently trouble choosing his next chief of staff. They don't want to get involved in that mess for a number of different reasons. Financial, legal, maybe for some of them moral, although they don't seem to be acting on it. So with that, we do have to take another break. When we come back, 2 cases of extreme injustice. One individual, one institutional. Hopefully we can get to both on the other side. Okay, just a couple of blocks left, so much to get to. Let's jump right back into it. In what appears like a stunning case of injustice, the Tennessee Supreme Court has rendered a judgment on Cyntoia Brown. She is a woman who a number of years ago, at the age of 16, killed a man, she says in self-defense. They have ruled that she will have to serve at least 51 years in jail. There's a 5-justice court said that she and other defendants who've been convicted of first-degree murder after July 1st back in the 90s and then sentenced to life in prison can't become eligible for release until they serve more than 5 decades, which is certainly a high bar. Now, if you're not familiar with this case, I want to give you a little bit of information about it. She says it was an act of self-defense after the man, Allen, took her to his house. He showed Cyntoia multiple guns, including shotguns and rifles. Later in bed, as she described in court, he grabbed her violently by the genitals. His demeanor became threatening, and fearing for her life, she took a gun out of her purse and shot him. She says that at the time that she shot him, it looked like he was reaching for a gun. So look, people for at least a year now have been very focused on this. It was actually the subject of a documentary several years ago. There's a MoveOn.org petition that's received more than 500,000 electronic signatures from people who support her release. And her argument that she took to the Tennessee Supreme Court was a 2012 Supreme Court opinion from the US Supreme Court to argue in the suit that being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for juvenile offenders violated the Constitution. Now, she was treated as an adult in her original case, despite the fact that she was only 16.
And the Supreme Court's argument is that, yes, she was sentenced to life in prison, but she wasn't sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So.
But it looks like there's no
violate
possibility of parole.
Right,
So-
51 years for someone who was 16 at the time that she was arrested. I mean,
yeah.
and it's 51 years. They're actually saying 60 years, but that 9 years can be shaved off by different forms of, good behavior, things like that. I think what's also important to note in this story, in the reporting of this story, is kind of how this story is framed and how it's talked about, and the importance of how it's talked about. Like, we call her a woman. She's absolutely a woman now, but at the time of her crime, she was a child.
16.
And then calling her a child prostitute and saying he was soliciting sex from her. A child cannot be a prostitute. That's the thing. You can't have both things. So there's just that. And then therefore this grown man who was 48 years old at the time cannot solicit sex from a child. This would just be rape.
Yeah.
It's not, she was a child.
She can't consent to it.
She can't consent to it, right?
And she says that there was a pimp who was controlling her named Cutthroat, who was violently and sexually abusing her. Look, you can look into her past. The Appeal has a great write-up about her complex history and everything. But look, she says it was self-defense. And the normal sorts of people that stand up for supposed cases of self-defense like this seem oddly quiet.
But also in the midst of like what is very clear that this grown man was committing a crime.
Yeah.
We know that part at least, for sure.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and in addition, he might have been threatening her life as well. Interesting tweet from Oh No She Twitten, sort of comparing this to another case that you might remember from last year. Adult Brock Turner only served 3 months for raping an unconscious woman because serving jail time would, quote, ruin his life, while teenage Cyntoia Brown has to serve 51 years in prison for killing her rapist. But please tell me more about how white male privilege is a myth. Obviously some differences in the case, but significant. 51 years, yeah, you could get out after 51 with good behavior. That's a lifetime. Yeah. Let's just put it out there. That's your entire life.
Starting at 16, right?
Because of something that she did in a moment of extreme fear while she was being effectively trafficked by a pimp.
And also, this made it to the Supreme Court, the Tennessee State Supreme Court, because of all of the other courts before it could not come to an agreement. You know, what is it, the Sixth Circuit Court in Tennessee? I mean,
they wanted the judgment of this Tennessee Supreme Court.
Right, and so like half of them, half of them said that she should be released. The other half said she shouldn't, and so they can't come to an agreement. And it's just, this is disappointing.
Yeah, it is. And look, it's possible that maybe the Court of Appeals thinks differently, or maybe they don't. And if they don't, it's possible that this could go all the way to the Supreme Court. That is certainly a possibility. There's probably other cases like this. But then you think about the Supreme Court that we have right now, and you wonder, does Cyntoia Brown have any chance of justice at the Supreme Court level, any more than along the way at these lower courts?
They don't even have to look at this case, that's the thing.
Yeah.
So if it's something
they could not.
There, they don't even, yeah.
And she could end up spending the rest of her life. I mean, she would still be looking at literally decades. It's hard to even wrap your mind around it. And thankfully in this case-
She would be nearly 70 years old when she was released at the best.
She will have missed her entire life effectively. And thankfully there's a lot of people talking about this, celebrities as well, using their platforms to get people to know about this. But no matter what, I mean, just gigantic injustice. That said, we're gonna close down this block just a little bit early. There's a big story I wanna talk about in the last block, more institutionalized injustice coming after this. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Just minutes remaining, and I want to talk about a story that I saw over the weekend, and I think it's just about one of the most awful things I've seen in a while.
Okay.
We talk about a lot of serious stuff.
The bar is high.
Also, that's really bad, but this is bad too. Okay, so a school district in Rhode Island apparently has an issue where people who have to pay paid lunch apparently aren't paying it and have accrued lunch debts. So they are moving to send debt collectors after the families of these kids that apparently are doing so badly economically that they can't afford to pay for full priced or reduced lunch. Chief Operating Officer of Schools in Cranston, Rhode Island recently sent a letter to parents warning them that the district had hired Transworld Systems, a private debt collector, to compel families with unpaid lunch balances to hand over the money. To give you an idea, a week's worth of lunches at those schools cost $12.50. In middle and high school, that price goes up to $16.25. Students who do not have money for lunch can charge up to 5 hot meals. If at that point they do not repay the debt, they are fed a butter sandwich, fruit and milk instead of a hot lunch, but they are still charged for the full price. They're just not getting it anymore.
Which is a problem. That's the biggest part of this story for me. They're giving them a sun butter sandwich, which I assume is just, it's like, It's nut butter. It's sunflower seeds.
Okay.
Butter.
Maybe that's better than regular butter. I don't know.
But so you're giving them a cold meal because you have to feed them. It's almost just like an embarrassment. That's what they're just like embarrassing a little child.
Yeah.
Because we're still charging you the same amount, which means that we could feed you a hot meal, but just out of punishment because your parents can't afford it, we are going to embarrass you and give you this little sandwich and a scoop of fruit and send you on your way, which just seems heartless. Also, if you can't afford $12.50 a week, which is completely understandable, a debt collector calling you every day isn't gonna magically make the money appear. So it's not like this is just gonna make more money. That doesn't make any sense. I think that why aren't they looking into the rules of their free and reduced lunch program? Because I can't imagine that. What was it, like $90,000 for 2 years of debt that is unpaid?
Yeah, the
school lunch debt.
$95,508.
So I can't imagine that parents are just refusing to fill out the forms. I imagine that they're filling it out and not getting approved.
Yeah.
And so the school district should be looking into that.
Yeah, and look, so I saw this and I thought, wow, debt collectors going after school lunch. That's absolutely insane. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, this makes sense that they're doing this, because it seems like a tragedy for the families, but obviously the school districts aren't gonna care and they need that money. Now look, apparently a lot isn't being paid, $95,000. And I've looked in other cases, it's added up to millions of dollars over the course of a decade or more. So obviously they need to get the money. But obviously the parents don't have the money. I find it a lot easier to believe these parents can't afford it than that we're all deadbeats.
Right, no,
and we
it's
want our kids to
absolutely
be
these parents can't
shamed.
afford it.
So here's the thing, when I saw this, I was like, this article is crazy. But is it actually crazy? Is it unique? And so I started to look back earlier. And it turns out this is actually not rare. This has been common for a number of years. In New York, I saw an article, school lunch debt districts taking to collection agencies and meal swap outs, very similar to Cranston, Rhode Island. That's in New York. We have in Nevada, as meal debt explodes, they weigh plan that could send unpaid accounts to collection. Some of these, by the way, that's 2018, I think. One of these is 2012. In Montana, they're removing collection agencies from meal debt policy because of how unpopular the policy actually was after they tried it. In Indiana, a US Army veteran was facing a collection agency over his kids' lunch money. He owed $500. And so they sent a collection agency to this vet to get it. Let's see, if we move to Minnesota, they're also using debt collectors. That's from 2015, by the way. And here's the thing, there's also the swap out. So it's bad enough if your family is getting calls, that's terrible. We've talked about how aggressive they tend to be. But the way that they're treating these kids is absolutely shameful. And in fact, they're using shame. So last year in Bedford, Kentucky, parents complained and accused the local elementary school of bullying after a child's lunch was confiscated and thrown away in front of her friends for running a negative balance. In Michigan, a high schooler was left embarrassed and hungry when his lunch was taken and trashed for owing $4.95. A 12-year-old in Texas had his school breakfast dumped over a 30-cent debt. And 2 years ago in Utah, some 40 students had their lunches seized for unpaid meal debts. So look, and we've got more and more and more. For the most part, you can do this. California apparently prohibits using debt collectors for school meal debt, but a lot of other places allow it. And I've even found instances in California, despite whatever prohibition we have, where it's happening here too. Now look, you wanna get your money, I totally get this. It might be that we have bigger economic problems if people can't afford to pay $5 or $8 or $10 a week.
Right.
That the issue here isn't debt collectors, the issue here is our economy.
Throwing lunches away, the fact that that happens over and over and over again, that's not just one crazy instance where somebody was fired. I mean, it starts to feel like it's not really about the money. It's just about shaming poor people, which is kind of an argument that it happens over and over here in America.
Exactly, like throwing it away implies that the money isn't really what's tight at the school.
So
you can afford
wasted the food, right? You can afford to throw food away.
Yeah, and in what, like don't we have a thing? Isn't there something in the Bible about the economic debts of parents not being able to be put onto kids? Like we have a prohibition culturally going back a tradition for a long time. This is the most direct fight against that I have seen. That you're gonna say, hey you kid, all your peers, all your friends, here gather around, I'm gonna dump your lunch out and make you feel so bad that you have to go and complain to your parents. As if they're not feeling their economic hardships enough,
right.
Their kids are gonna be coming and saying, my life is being ruined, my reputation is being ruined because of how poor we are.
Also, I didn't eat today, and also what happens a lot, guys, is that a lot of people, there are a lot of instances where if a family can't afford $12 a week, that likely this meal is the only meal that kid is getting.
Exactly. It's
and
not like
so
they're going home to filet mignon.
Think about the fact that like you didn't have breakfast, you don't have dinner, you're not gonna have dinner, and your lunch gets thrown away over 30 cents.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe collection agencies aren't the solution. Maybe we need something a little bit more fundamental.
I get it. Things have to money makes the world go round, but like I feel like I would like schools. I would like most important to be kids and their well-being.
Hopefully at some point. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us. Great to have you on. Thank you for watching, everybody. Tomorrow, lots more for you, including Emma Vigland. Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.